Board, I hereby declare the public examination of Miika Hyytiäinen's demonstration of proficiency open. We are here to examine the demonstration of proficiency of diploma composer, Master of Philosophy Miika Hyytiäinen. The title of the thesis is Voice Map Method, Enhancing Composer-Singer Communication. In addition to the written report, the portfolio includes a software package for the voice map analysis and 3 opera compositions. The development object is the voice map method, or VMM, which enhances communication between singers and composers to enable the creation of new vocal music. And I would like to now present the board that is present here. First, we have Doctor of Philosophy, Professor, Singer, Composer Arjan Jesulat on the screen, distant from Berlin. Then we have Dr. Ulla Pohjanoro, who is Chair of the Artistic Panel, and members of the Artistic Panel, Composer Matthias Hinke and Composer Juhan Nuorvala. The examiners will now be seated in the audience to hear Miika Hyytiäinen's Lectio Precursoria, which will be followed by the examination.
Honored Chair, honored examiners, dear audience. In a grant application, I wrote 2 years ago a following description. Voices, Voices is an audio installation opera about voice and identity. It is composed for 4 coloratura sopranos. And as is the case for many grant applications, this is a lie. Voices, Voices was not composed for 4 coloratura sopranos. Instead, I did compose this opera very specifically for Kaisa Dahlbeck, Annika Fuhrman, Marika Höltä, and Kaisa Ranta, here alphabetically. Surely enough, they all do identify themselves more or less as coloratura sopranos. I know this because I asked. They have even made careers, mostly based on singing roles that are in the category coloratura soprano roles. But my statement stays, I couldn't have composed 50 minutes of music for 4 coloratura sopranos. I actually tried. I composed 1 section of the opera thinking only coloratura soprano and trying to forget the identities behind the Fach. And I failed miserably. It was clear in my head what kind of quotes Annika Fuhrman would like to sing and what kind of interesting intonations Kaisa Ranta would find in German text. Actually, even my body started to fight against this process. Why did I lie? And why do I open the most prestigious academic talk of my life so far by confessing this lie? We will get back to that later on. But first, let's go to a little trip where I walk through the whole process of this development. I have divided our journey into 3 segments that each try to answer one question. Those questions are what, how, and why. Between the first 2 sections, we are going to hear Marika Höltä and Kaisa Ranta perform a composition, Third Sisters, which is based on the scene of the opera Voices, Voices, which was then premiered in 2021. Let's start with the what. I will talk to you about the voice map method. I developed it to enhance the communication between singers and composers. This communication takes place when these 2 have decided to work together, and it is a starting point that will proceed in the composer writing a piece for the singer, and even later the singer will perform this piece. The voice map method can be helpful for any composer, but especially composers that are inexperienced in vocal music can benefit from them. With the method, the composer can understand this specific voice really well, but also the voice in general as an instrument, so to say. The voice map method consists of two parts. Computer-aided voice map analysis, which is the process of creating graphical map of the possibilities of singer's voice. Voice map method, voice map analysis, and voice map in the end. But the second part is the list of good questions. It gives a structure for discussion between the singer and composer. These questions range from the details of the map to general skills and wishes of the singer. Often, the analysis software, the idea that you can analyze a singer's voice fully and quickly, takes all the attention. But we must not get seduced by efficiency and digitalism. The goal of the method is to enhance communication. The value of the voice map and the analysis is in how it can create common ground between the singer and the composer. And although this section is about the question what, I do want to mention two motivations. Firstly, during the process, I used the voice map method with 22 singers and talked to many more of them. As different as these singers were, a vast majority, almost all of them, agreed that some kind of tool or method was desperately needed to enhance this communication, which was so problematic and actually in many cases didn't exist at all. The other motivation was and is my own. And I will use it as the first step describing the whole development process. Namely, all my life, I have been working in different roles with different voices, as a singer, as a performer, as a production assistant, director, and composer. I've been able to observe the good, interesting, and not so successful processes when a composer and singer create a new piece together. Intuitively, I started to collect these good practices and utilize them in my work. Speaking from this stage now, those practices seem good, but somewhat naive. Luckily for me, most other composers seem to understand the functionality of the human voice even worse than I do, and I did. As the saying goes, in the country of the blind, the one-eyed man is a king. I was able to involve some of these practices in my own pedagogical work, but I started to doubt myself. I was happy with the results, but I wasn't quite sure what I was precisely doing. This seemed like a good starting point for a doctoral project, finding names and more formal shapes for my intuition so that also other composers and singers would benefit from it. And indeed, it started a positive circle. Just a second. And we will start with that positive virtual circle. We don't need to cursor that. In this image, I have collected the whole process. This is the whole process that I've gone through in the 7 years. I'm going to go through it step by step, but we can already see the three parts. Firstly, we start from here. I had some ideas from the previous artistic work. And to understand them better, I studied literature written by vocal pedagogues, voice scientists, and musicologists. It helped me find a technical description or even a solution for the questions that I had. Secondly, and we're going now to the blue area, I used it to create the voice map method further. Thirdly, the new version of the voice map method was used in creating a new vocal piece. This then created a new demand, and the circle could begin again. So, we start here with the yellow theory part. I was trying to find the words for my intuition. As I went to the literature, I did find important ideas that could help me further. Especially helpful were the vocal register and a system that is called voice range profile. The latter is a method used by voice scientists to analyze a person's voice and to create a visual version of it. On top of these two really crucial ones, I also found some questions and concerns concerning the FAST2 system. The two main components were crucial when I created the first version of the voice map method. It had some parameters and ideas from the voice range profile, but I had made alterations that would help specifically singers and composers to communicate with each other. Here we have an image of already a bit older voice range profile from Salter, Witt, Schotte, and Miller from 1994. And there are some similarities between voice range profile and voice map method. The person whose voice is being analyzed sings through their whole range. First, as softly as possible, then as loudly as possible. These results are then written into a graph, frequency of the sound on x-axis and the dynamic on the y-axis. So if you would want to read what is the minimum dynamic for this frequency, you could read it from this point, and the maximum dynamic is here. And this is also the case for voice map method. But the crucial alterations and individual decisions, they were also already there in the first version. I created the program using the Max MSP programming language, which is by far the most common in the composing world. Deciding what kind of scales could best help the singer was quite demanding task, and I find different techniques and methods of going through the whole range. There was also things that I edited out. I decided not to use some of the precise numeric data, which wouldn't have been helpful for this communication. And finally, the decision that the process would go through register by register, or as we later on, area by area, and not directly through the whole range. The register by register is in the voice map method, and in the voice range profile, this image is a result of the whole voice, and there is no differentiation between the different registers and areas. Actually, trying to find those registers in the image is one of the most studied parts of analyzing a voice range profile. This latter decision is an important parameter for a composer and can create good and sometimes also heated discussions. There are numerous different theories and terminologies concerning the vocal registers. What do I mean with the word register? Manuel Garcia's definition from 1847 seems to be still widely accepted. I quote, By the word register, we mean a series of consecutive and homogeneous tones going from low to high, produced by the development of the same mechanical principle, and whose nature differs essentially from another series of tones, equally consecutive and homogeneous, and produced by another mechanical principle. So within the register, there needs to be similarity, but there also needs to be dissimilarity between the two different registers. On top of that, a lot of the education of a classical singer involves equalizing the voice. That is, hiding the differences of the registers. From the composer's point of view, the registers can nevertheless be an interesting tool. Composers such as Mozart used their knowledge of the voice and the registers and could practically orchestrate for the different registers. For more precise examples, I ask you to refer to my report. To summarize, singers are somewhat reluctant to talk about the registers, and different theories are somewhat confusing, and especially a composer inexperienced in vocal music would benefit from understanding them. My solution in this situation was to use a new term. Instead of registers, I speak of areas. Registers are a technical term. They are something measurable with right and wrong answers. And I decided to use the term area, which is a communicational tool. It is an object of discussion between singer and composer, and only concerns certain specific aspects of the voice. The singer could themselves decide how many areas they have or what to name them. Names of the areas were not just labels. They also carried certain associations. To have two examples from my testing phase, I listened to two registers quite differently because one of them was called mixed head and the other one was called the golden area. But at the same time, if I would study them using different voice science techniques, they would have had the similar laryngeal mechanism. So technically speaking, they were the same register. This concern of singers wanting to equalize their voices, also from the composer, was not only theoretical. Many singers were indeed at first reluctant to talk about their registers or areas. Once or twice, only when I had explained the theoretical background I come from and even had given some examples from the classical repertoire, they were willing to reveal their areas. But after the analysis, all the singers were quite happy that they could see their own voice from a different point of view. And especially the singers that took part in my artistic components, to whom I composed new music, they seemed to be rather pleased. Which brings us back to the theme. With the help of programmer Hyytiäi, I created a voice map analysis software, and after some preliminary tries, I used it with one singer, Hyytiäinen. This test turned later on to an opera voice box, premiered in 2017. Other performers were Jacinta Danström playing flute, doing circus and singing, as well as Maija Parko playing keyboards, lecturing and singing, and in later version also doing clownery. The first artistic component is a celebration of different vocal techniques and emphasizes the possibilities a composer can use when they understand the details of the voice, for example, the areas. sorry. Voice Box is a lecture opera, comical experimental music theatre. I wrote myself the libretto, and it is heavily based on my theoretical findings at that point. The areas of Mia Heikkinen's voice were used as the basis of the composition almost dogmatically. All vocal music and a lot of instrumental music was composed to or around these areas. The musical motifs were all inspired by them. Actually, even the structure of the whole opera was based on these areas. The opera is divided into 5 lectures, and each presents one of Heikkinen's areas. For example, lecture number 4, called Fachsystem Bu, uses vocal fry, sung by all the performers as a temporal element. On top of that, I used some of the dynamic options and even the rhythms of the vocal fry area when composing this lecture. But let us go to the following phase. Now that a lot of terminology is clear, I will proceed a little bit faster. During all these phases, I was also using the voice map method with different singers to optimize the analysis process further. At this point, the question of vibrato got a lot of my attention. In some cases, the software didn't easily recognize the pitch of the voice. It was evident that especially dramatic voices with a noticeable vibrato were tricky for the software, at least for that version. After some testing and finding a new object from the Max MSP toolkit, the question of vibrato was rather easily then solved. But that's not the whole story. Part of creating something new is not being able to predict everything. Rather late in the process, I decided to involve one scene of the opera Nomictic Solutions from year 2018 as my second artistic component. And this new decision changed my plans. The opera was commissioned by the Münchener Biennale, its Festival für Neues Musiktheater, and the opera was performed at Starnberg, next to Munich. Part of the concept of the opera was that the audience travels with the performers. The artistic team consists of video artist Babylonia Konstantinides, and a stage and costume designer Anna-Maria Münzner, and composer Nicola Kuhn, and myself as a composer. We all worked interdisciplinarily, but especially the concept of 2 composers creating an opera together is special. Because of this, I only used very specific music composed solely by me as the artistic component. And this specific point was composed for Martina Koppelstädter. And of course, we used the voice map method. Koppelstädter's voice is very special. Her voice is extremely low. So much so that only after this extensive analysis of the areas, I could comprehend it. For example, tones that would be roughly in the middle of the range of most female voices, say C5, C above the middle C, they are the middle part of most female voices. But for Koppelstädter, they were already extremely high. Simultaneously, her voice reached so low that it was actually comparable to a light tenor voice. And this humbling experience actually made clear to me yet another important aspect of the voice map method. That the voice map, the visual information of the voice, it is important for finding common ground for communication, finding vocabulary, so to say. But even more important, is that the composer will listen to the voice of the singer while doing the analysis. The composer will have a very concrete idea of how the singer reacts while doing the analysis, and how the singer's body moves when these tones are produced. Without seeing these efforts physically in the same room, I would not have actually understood Kopelstedt's voice. It seems to be against everything I knew about voice, and only going through it part by part and seeing the physical reacts and allowing my mirror cells to react, I was able to grasp it. And it was, of course, hugely inspiring. Kopelstedt sang in the section from mythology. She sings from the deck of a ship, which is sailing on the Lake Starnberg, with the audience on the top of the deck, listening to the song. I will not go to the details of the plot, but to summarize, a German company, Nomictic Solutions, is trying to sell to the audience a mysterious supervision method that is based on listening to the voices of the people. Kopelstedt's character, the press officer, was there to lure the people into believing the company's lies, so that the audience wouldn't dig too deep into the ethical questions. The music was very ornamented, and all the words were so fragmented that it was difficult not to get lost to all the interesting colors. So not to think about the meaning of the words, and definitely not the meaning of the sentences. Also in this case, like I did in VoiceBox, I used the singer's areas as a compositional tool. If VoiceBox was split into discrete musical sections dedicated to specific areas, in Nomictic Solutions, the areas and colors changed like in a kaleidoscope. Kopelstedt's voice had many small areas, and especially in the very lowest part, the tiniest melodic gesture could easily create almost automatical wide temporal spectrum. This was the second phase of my development process, and now we will get to the last and third part. In the third and final phase, I was interested in the question of singer's formant. It is a phenomenon of the voice that allows classically trained singers to project their voice through an orchestra. Researchers, especially Johan Sundberg, have been able to find this phenomenon in different voice types. According to them, dramatic mezzo-soprano, tenor, baritone, and bass voices possess it. Soprano voices, less so. During the early stages of my project, way before we are at this point, I had decided to mainly focus on testing high and lyrical voices, mainly people who would see themselves as sopranos and coloratura sopranos. The argument was that these kind of voices are most popular among the composers, so the need for this kind of analysis would be high. And they also would provide a clear and technically approachable starting point. From that point on, I tried to introduce lower voices for my testing and was successful in creating a system that can demonstrate singer's formant enough to help the communication. And I'm looking forward to continuing this research in further studies. Knowing that this would be the final stage of my development project, I wanted to have a production that would put the method to an ultimate test and still be somehow within my original plan. I decided to stay with my original limit, high lyrical female voices, as a tool. I would compose what I called a piece for 4 coloratura sopranos. And before I process, I should probably make my state clear. Dividing people into different voice types has been there for centuries, and it can't and shouldn't be stopped. Also, opera industry, this net of opera companies, for example, hundreds of houses in Germany, they need a very specific system. The solution is called a Fachsystem, and it is strongly connected to the book called Handbuch der Oper by Gläuber, Gounod, and Maschka. The concept of Fach is so important to the opera industry that it would be highly unethical to let a young singer graduate from an art university without them having a good understanding of how they are positioned in this system. For a composer, the system can be dangerous. We are not trained to understand its nuances, and it doesn't give us enough information about the actual voice that will perform the piece. And I will get back to this in the last part of my lecture. So the process of creating voices started for me when I decided to compose for 4 interesting singers with interesting voices. They are Kaisa Dahlbeck, who sings a lot of early music, Annika Fuhrmann, who is especially known for expressive contemporary music, Marika Höltä, younger singer that has also experience in both classical music and pop techniques, and Kaisa Ranta, who was probably the most classical impersonation of an agile voice that also has a certain singer's format or dramatic bite. With the voice map method, I could understand very specifically these voices. While composing, I didn't compare them with each other. They weren't competing. They were coexisting. And surely enough, certain unexpected combinations did occur. Certain areas of certain singers were very similar, and then suddenly, in the next moment, with relatively small gestures, I could show that the voices couldn't be more different, that they couldn't be more unique, and that calling all of them just one Fach is just very narrow part of the story. Voices is an audio installation opera, so only a recorded version exists. This allowed me to compose material that very specifically showed these similarities and differences in a way that created a dramaturgical arch. The opera premiered in 2021 with Lona Hossia in gamba and Pinja Nunes in cello taking the role of the orchestra, and Maija Turunen was the tonmeisterin. A different aspect of the theme, voice and identity, was demonstrated in each of these 8 scenes. I would like us now to listen to a musical example that is based on the scene Bird Sisters. It is a story of 2 sisters lost in the forest and creating their own language based on their own voices and anatomy. In the beginning, it is easy to hear how the voices mix together almost seamlessly. But in the end, the personalities of these characters have differentiated. Kaisa Ranta's character's voice is more dramatic, whereas Marika Höltä's character's voice has chosen the path of pelting. And this version that we hear today is actually world premiere because, as I said, the piece only existed before as a recording. And maybe you can pay attention that in the analysis, I was also able to find clear singer's formant in Ranta's voice, and I used it as a compositional tool, so it does exist for sopranos too. Please, Marika Höltä and Kaisa Ranta.
The Fairy Tale of Mjunin and Hugin. Once upon a time, there were two children, Mjunin and Hugin. Mjunin was 4, but Hugin was only 2 years old. They walked deep into a forest and were lured by its beautiful sounds. Suddenly, they realized they were lost. A lonely bird found them and raised them as her own. It was the bird mother's time to go, so Mjunin and Hugin had to survive all alone. They comforted each other with their very own beautiful language. Newman could only remember some human words, but for Hugin, the forest and birds were everything she could remember, and of course her dear sister and shadows of her bird mother.
Thank you, Marika Höltä and Kaisa Ranta. So this was the language that I imagined two young coloratura sopranos would create if they would live long enough together in a forest. And every phrase, everything that they sang, actually, in the score, you can read what they were saying. So it wasn't just unintentional chirping, it was actual talk. So, after what, it is time to get to the next question, how? So far, I've shown that what I was able to achieve with the help of the voice map method was something that was really fulfilling for me. But how does the system work? I will mainly concentrate on the voice map analysis in this part. The software design layout and programming were done by me and composer-programmer Hyytiäi together. It was always my role to bring in the new question, new feature that the software should have. Making it approachable by singers and composers was essential. For example, the Max MSB programming language that I mentioned was chosen because it is the one that most composers know and use. The main argument wasn't how practical it would be for us to use it for programming. The voice map method software is open source. So we also wish that the composers will continue to develop, continue the development from this moment on. And that would be more likely when they already know the language. Also, typical voice range profile uses the frequencies as the reference point. But in the voice map method, it only refers to pitches, musical pitches, to maintain the musical aspect. We were also able to be more casual with the technical demands of the analysis situation and tools. The analysis could be done in any of the rooms of the music hall, for example. The singer, as they are doing the analysis, may be moving a centimeter or two, and as I said, the room may be slightly bigger or smaller or have a bit different acoustics. These points are not relevant in the voice map method, since the composer and singer are only discussing this general shape and the relative dynamics. Strict dogmatic limitations on the process would create results that are possibly slightly more exact, but they would also make the analysis situation much more stressful. The voice map method has the following steps. The singer notes down the names and approximate ranges of the areas. The composer, or maybe some other technical person, types this down to the software, and of course the technical person can also be the singer. The singer decides in which order they want to go through the whole area. And whatever they choose, by the end, each tone of each area is sung as loud as possible and as soft as possible. And I thought I would give a short demonstration of how I would begin to analyze the very soft tones of the middle register of Mika Hyytiäinen. I would give the tones as two scales to the ear, and then I would press the record on, and then I would give a sign, and then the person would sing something like this. And what you could hear is that the interpretation of this magnificent singer was slightly varying. There were some notes were more legato, some had less legato, and even some tones that would be almost glissando would still be okay for the analysis. There are limitations of how long the note should be. The vowel is always R, and the distance between the singer and the recording microphone is always 50 centimeters. And deciding all these minute details of the process was a quite demanding task. And I want to thank all the 22 singers who have helped me in the development of the analysis process. So I wanted to make the voice map method easy and reliable. But my goal was also not to push the composer to any direction aesthetically. I am myself a composer of experimental music theater. Because of that, I use the areas on all the parameters. It's typical for how I work. But also completely different approach would be possible. Say, composer has a discussion with the singer, and composer then has a solid understanding of the areas. And then they compose, and the music doesn't take these areas into account in any way. It goes against the areas, it goes within them, and so on, totally randomly. That's possible, but at least the decision is then an informed one. I might add that this is something which is probably important psychologically for the composer to make decisions informed, but I have also noticed that it is important for the singer that they understand that if the song is demanding, if there is something which seemed quite unidiomatic for the voice, they know that this is an informed decision. It's not a mistake. When creating the analysis situation, the objective was to find the essentials of each voice. Because of that, the singer doesn't sing any existing music. And even these small figures that I sung are abstract, almost non-musical. This way, the composer can, hopefully, concentrate on the voice itself and not to get too entangled by the composition they are listening to. So, for example, if the singer would be singing some art song repertoire, the composer could easily start to understand that voice only in that context and start to compose within that or against that. And as I mentioned, after the voice map method analysis, the singer and composer proceed to read the voice map together. This here is an example analysis result. The singer has allowed me to use it as an example, and I have slightly changed it to be more informative. It uses scientific pitch notation, so A4, which we have here, is 440 Hz. It's the A above middle C. The loudest dynamics are indicated with these filled dots, and the softest dynamics with these whole ones. Each color is a different area. So in this case, we have the blue one going from lowest to highest, blue one, orange one, green one, red one, and then the black one, which seemed to be missing something. There is something fishy with it. We will get to that. First, the composer may notice a certain very loud area, which is here in red, and also green goes towards it. It requires a lot of effort from the singer, and as you can see, these minimum values are indeed getting a little bit louder. But in general, the singer has very good minimum values, or not very good, but very practical minimum values. And the maximum values here are also quite striking. These black dots are actually an experiment by the singer, and I would assume that they are actually something that is called singer's flute register, or laryngeal mechanism number 3. What is interesting are also these couple of notes that are shared by more than one area. For example, there are these 2 notes that are shared by blue and orange. There are 3 notes that are shared by green and orange. There are 3 notes that are shared by green and red, and so on. These tones coexist with what the vocal pedagogues like to call passaggio areas. They are something between the areas or in the limit of the area. They can be technically demanding, so the composer should always discuss it in detail with the singer, but at the same time they have these quite interesting compositional possibilities. If we talk about this first area here, which might be the first passaggio, the blue area seems to have a bit more dynamic maximum. The dynamic maximum seems to be a bit higher for the blue area than for the orange area, which means that if the composer would like to compose very loud tones for the passaggio, which might be a good idea or might not, depends on the singer, the loud notes would probably be easier if the singer approaches them from below. This was the structure. These were some examples of how I have used and analyzed the voice map method. And of course, this is further discussed fully in my written report. In my written report, the structure is somewhat different that I used in this speech. The report opens with a background, which comprises the theory of registers, vibrato, singer's formant, and some other questions from the voice sciences and vocal pedagogy. Also discussion of fast system, and finally description of the voice range profile. In the second development part, I have described the technical and artistic testing we have heard here. And in the third part, conclusions, I talked about the possibilities of this method and how it could be developed further. And we are now reaching this last part, and also this last part of my lecture. It answers to the question, why? I hope that at this point of my personal motivation, at this point of my speech, my personal motivation is clear. As I was composing these 3 artistic components, the voice map method allowed me to find special things in all these voices. In the future studies, I will keep on testing how other composers can recognize them. But clearly, in the context of an artistic doctorate, this was only a beginning. It might seem surprising that this communication between singers and composers would even be something that needs enhancing. But it does. It surely does. The main question here is the education of the composers. And I'm not referring to any one specific university. In general, the state of what the future composers learn about singers' voice is sad. Their knowledge is based on workshops and small projects that vary from year to year. It's all based on luck. While instruments are studied unquestionably as a part of the training of a composer week by week, there is no formal structure of where these students would learn about registers or text or singer's formant, or about how to compose for a voice. Unfortunately, this hasn't had the effect that the composers would understand the gap in their knowledge. Very often, even now, the composers don't even want to talk with the singers. They simply compose for a virtual soprano, and then the surprise at the rehearsals can be an unpleasant one. More often than not, the idea of the voice type or Fach is faulty or limited, and the whole understanding of the functionality of the voice is flawed. In this situation, a soprano could really mean everything or anything. Let's do a short exercise before we close. Please look to your left. Thank you. And now look to the person on your right. Thank you. Those people on your left and on your right have totally different understandings of what soprano means. And they are also quite different from what you think it is. And if you have different backgrounds, it's probably even more so. Surely, if you are more specific and use the Fach, such as lyrische Koloratursopran, the variation is smaller if you work with singers and singing professionals, but still, it is not good enough for a composer. My hope is that the composers are slowly starting to understand this problem, and working with actual singers will be part of the studies all around the world. And of course, the voice map method will be there to support this process. Interestingly enough, historically, this always was the way it was done. According to the literature, actually many composers who are now composing large-scale operas still prefer to compose for a very specific person. It's only the inexperienced ones who do this mistake. And the historical evidence is clear. The music tailor-made to fit one singer's voice usually can and will be sung by other singers too. Music composed for the imaginary virtual soprano, the image of your mind, fits nobody. And as I said, to make this process, the communication needs to be as easy and smooth and fluent as possible, hopefully with the help of the voice map. To tie all the open strings, I do need to get back to the very beginning of my talk, the lie. I told the lie because I thought that it was good marketing. People had in their minds their own virtual coloratura sopranos, and they would love the idea of hearing 4 identical copies of them singing together, maybe competing or fighting with each other. And I was right. We did get the grant. The lie was successful. But I also want to make honesty the central component of this journey. And honestly, my virtual soprano is much more boring than any of the living singers I've ever met. I hereby call upon you, honored examiners, appointed by the Sibelius Academic Board, to evaluate my demonstration of proficiency and to present the critical comments you deem it deserves.
Now we are here. The statements, and we will start with Dr. Ariane. Yes, what?
When it comes down to writing the final statement about the doctoral thesis, whose parts relevantly combine artistic and scientific perspectives in content, methods, and concept, the question is how to measure its quality. It might be clear that even traditional doctoral theses restricted to the scientific part cannot be judged by leaving out the question of how or if their methods, concepts, and content communicate and correspond to the arts. Therefore, the scientific evaluation of meager, easy report does not depend on scientific standards of quotation, references, framing, or approved scientific or empirical research methods. If that was the case, I have to criticize the lack of the certain corpus for empirical studies like the representative testing group, the lack of references to medicine researchers, maybe the lack of close reading of contemporary music scholars containing extended vocal techniques, and so on. In my final statement, which won't just repeat arguments of my previous statement, I will clearly show that those lacks who might address a certain idea of scientific objectivity will not touch the research work Mika Hyytiäinen has demonstrated in his report. I will go further by saying that today's musicology in contemporary art has a problem framing certain questions and research fields to which extended vocal techniques apparently belong. Giant encyclopedia such as My 18th 21st Century Voice or smaller essays such as Randall Adele's Lexicon of the Mouth show that with the paradigm shift in the musical avant-garde in the second half of the 20th century, the changes have been in a way radical, that the revolution of vocal techniques was released, so to say, the formative those where the traditional bonds have been the strongest and still are. So the answer to a good research question should not have hurt tons of material. In today's compositional practice, with its highly individual varieties absolutely senseless. But it should afford a successful key concept to bundle and sharpen those questions concerning the artistic use of the human voice in contemporary hybrid opera production. This problem of framing a research question which could further bridge the gap between scientific and artistic approaches is one of the challenges Mika Hyytiäinen's report takes on. While contemporary musicology could not concentrate on a particular, say, heritage at the dance avant-garde, for example, without losing contact hopelessly with today's artistic questions that tend to refer idiosyncratically to a global heterotopic network. The focus on method as BMM should not be presented as a lack or an improvised solution in the race sea of data about extended vocal techniques, but as a chance to work on a model. The artistic need for a method as BMM becomes manifest in situations when unexperienced composers fail to compose idiomatically for singers. This failure is even increasing by the tendencies of neue Musik since the 1920s to write highly complex and demanding parts for especially very high voices. Even scores by acclaimed, highly educated and established composers with a long and competitive history of performances like Silvana Busotti or Rebecca Saunders via some terra incognita. Adequate reading and performing the score is still far from self-evident, but needs adequate communication. How to perceive, perform, and aesthetically evaluate even elementary aspects of contemporary music depends on elaborately parsing conditions. Especially singers might be at risk of investing their bodies and their health in situations that are neither clear nor adequately communicated, since the epistemic background and style of the score stick to outdated or wrong normative borders. Hyytiäinen outlines different paradigmatic cases of misunderstanding or misusing the traditional system of Stimmfächer, which is still taught at art universities and still very valid in the opera industry. Sometimes its validity comes to the degree that composers make the experience of a traditional vocal act to improve the production conditions. So this was the line in the beginning. Further, Hyytiäinen analyzes the technique The teaching situations, the needs and study programs, and concludes that composition students fundamentally learn orchestration and instrumentation techniques, history and style, the German Instrumentenkunde instrumentation. On the other side, the traditional curricula seldom offer opportunities to learn about singing standards and theory and practice for young composers. This asymmetry in the curricula grows even more when there are few chances to get in touch with singers in vocal or mixed ensembles. The voice map method elaborates the approach of the voice range profile, an analytical tool established in voice studies to explore dynamics, formants, possibilities, and the so-called voice areas. Hyytiäinen's method refines and enhances the voice range profile feature to transform it from a rather poetic text situation into an artistic communication between singer and composer. The VMM offers possibilities to explore the voice of primarily classically trained singers, but also other singers, systematically and comprehensively, with a particular emphasis on the use of vibrato, the different transitions between voice areas, and the so-called singer's format. Throughout the report, Hyytiäinen presents VMM as a critical answer to the Stumpfächer tradition. Due to the nature and dynamics of critique, the VMM as practiced by Hyytiäinen still clings to the opera tradition and concentrates on opera singers, or at least classically trained singers, who identify themselves with certain Stimmfächer, but it's not excluding other singers. Hyytiäinen's use of the nickname virtuoso soprano shows the relation between VMM and Fachsystem. While the term virtuoso soprano describes a cluster of rather abstract ideas by composers of the soprano voice, which should deliver the ranges marked by the Stimmfach, the VMM does not ignore the Fach system at all, but handles the outline of the Fach as a starting point for the artistic communication to add further vocal, personal, and creative dimensions, a whole world of new creative dimensions. In some aspects, VMM may be seen as a perfect counterpart to the Fach system. When classical voice training tends to equalize the different voice areas, VMM is practiced by Hyytiäinen works out and emancipates the different colors, timbres, and functionalities of the voice area and its transitions to explore new dimensions of voice, beyond the aesthetics of classical operatic singing, which feel highly inspiring potential for contemporary music theatre. The gender fluidity of VMM may be very useful to explore voice areas beyond the binary gap between male and female Stimmfächer. This transgender disposition of the VMM seems to be promising research to deepen in practice. Mika Hyytiäinen focuses on transitions between areas, genres such as classical singing, jazz, and pop belting style, choral, the vocal fry, cat vibrato, and other slightly domesticized topics of extended vocal techniques. It is no coincidence that all three of Hyytiäinen's operas in the research project concentrate on the voice. While instead, the three operas approach three different aspects of contemporary opera singing, accompanied, influenced, produced, and documented by VMM. VMM plays different structural, narrative, and processual roles depending on the development of the method and on the singer's voices. Hyytiäinen's report clearly shows the development of the method during his different compositional projects in collaboration with singers. Hyytiäinen describes the method regarding functionality, historical and scientific context, and applicability. Technical appendices and instructions are part of the report. VMM is profiled as a contemporary answer to the limited Fach system in the report. Through VMM, Hyytiäinen enhances classical opera composition and production traditions to methods and communicative infrastructures of voice studies and contemporary music theatre. Furthermore, Hyytiäinen demonstrates how the same traditional normativity of classical composing has formed and stiffened the curricula and study programs for young composers at European art schools. The report successfully demonstrates how E&M works as a critical commentary deeply rooted in today's artistic practice built on collaboration, plurality, and intersubjectivity. Coming back to a point I made in the pre-examination about the role and function of the German Fachsystem in music history, including contemporary music, I tend to turn it into a promising perspective of Hyytiäinen's scientific research approach. Way back in history, in times of bel canto, when singing was taught by solfeggio composed by Rocco Rudio, Adriano Banchieri, Angelo Bartolocchi, and many others of the Italian school, the interdependencies between pedagogy, musical structure, such as counterpoint, and specific persona which might fit into those coordinates have been apparent. Looking back at the musical period when the Fachsystem was heavily stressed, namely in Richard Wagner's musical drama, we may find in Caroline Abbate's excellent but somewhat older book, Unsung Voices from 1991, some precious hints. Abbate was one of the leading writers who drove forward ideas of new musicology. She pointed out that the outdated frontier between primary musical structures as counterpoint and harmony and secondary parameters as sound, timbre, and performance mainly neglects the structural role of the specific voice treatment defined in Wagner. The voice method, intelligently applied, bridges the gap between structural hearing and the world of timbre, sound, and expression. Since I'm unsure if ideas concerning those fundamental problems of musicology may be found in one single branch of the discipline, further studies should look carefully for connections in today's research. The WM is overall well documented and reflected in Hyytiäinen's report. Seeing that WM and Hyytiäinen's reflections in the report will foster both sides, contemporary art and musicology, by leveling out maybe obstructed binarities between arts and sciences, and seeing that the work fulfills all standards of scientific quality and transparency, I clearly second the thesis being part of the demonstrations of proficiency of Mika Hyytiäinen's structural degree. Thank you.
Thank you. The statement on behalf of the artistic panel will be given by Dr. Ulla.
So, this is the joint statement by the artistic committee with Pia Freund, not here today, online listening maybe, Matthias Hinke, Mieko Kanno, not here, Erik Söderblom, not here, Juhani Nuormala, and me as the chair. In his artistic applied doctoral studies, Hyytiäinen created a method that helps vocal music composers to communicate with singers more fluently. Hyytiäinen's creation, the voice map method, helps the composer to discover the specific voice he is composing for, so that he is able to adjust his writing to the personal voice character of the singer and even capitalize on it. The voice map method comprises a computer application called voice map analysis and a questionnaire to assist the composer in ensuring the mutual comprehension in the process. VMA, voice map analysis, grounds on voice range profile speech analysis tool, adjusted and applied to singers by Hyytiäinen. To test, evaluate, and develop his method, Hyytiäinen composed 3 experimental operas. This final evaluation statement by the artistic panel of Hyytiäinen reports how he achieved his artistic aspirations within these artistic demonstrations of proficiency. In his first opera, representing the genre of experimental music theatre, Voice Box, an academic opera role play, the name in its whole, 2017, Hyytiäinen's aim was to define the general functionality of voice map analysis. The performance makes fun of the traditional singer's system and presents a multi-layered, self-referential portrayal of Miika Hyytiäinen, the composer, who is writing an artistic thesis and analyzes the vocal possibilities of the coloratura soprano Mia Heikkinen's voice with an electric equipment called Voice Box. In this production, Hyytiäinen was responsible for the whole concept of the performance: composition, libretto, video shooting, direction, the stage and costume design, and the live execution of the performance. However, in his report, we can read that there was a lot of workshop with the performers and also Liisa Forhammer as the dramaturg. The artistic committee applauded the work and its imaginative execution as a fine demonstration of Hyytiäinen's skills, experience, and theatrical instincts. Hyytiäinen's fresh and brave attitude was appreciated, and the idea of fictionalizing a lecture demonstration into an opera performance was considered ingenious as well as enjoyable. Hyytiäinen showed himself as an intelligent composer with a superb command of irony and humor. At this point of method development, the artistic committee was not fully convinced about the role of voice map method, its benefits and added value to the compositional process. Compared with just an ordinary conversation between a composer and a singer, supplemented by attending a recital or singing demonstration with some joint experimentation. This happens a lot with composers. Was the outcome of voice map method really reflected on the singing part? And where is the proof that one really needs voice map method with this kind of music, instead of using another existing software spectrum analyzer? The second opera, Nomictic Solutions, was a site-specific performance opera produced by Münchener Biennale. In this project, Hyytiäinen's aim was to understand the singer's atypical timbres as suggested by the artistic committee in the feedback session of the first opera, Voice Box. Hyytiäinen and the artistic group fabricated a satirical allegory about the substance of the human voice. This piece presented a showcase of a new business plan named Nomictic Solutions, where the audience was seen as the potential customers of the product. Nomictic Solutions is an innovative audio-sensitive system that produces personality inventories through the voice analysis of human beings. However, the performance turns into a dystopia when the audience is insinuated to suspect that the company actually is producing a surveillance system that in the end would control the minds of its customers, so the audience. In this piece, Hyytiäinen used graphical notation devised and used by him already in earlier pieces by him. The vocal part, performed by the exceptionally wide voice range alto singer Martina Kopperstetter, utilizes a megaphone as an extra musical parameter. This was raised as a critical issue in terms of showing the utility of using VMA as a tool for composing for a specific voice. On the contrary, the megaphone partly seemed to work against the use of the information gained from the voice map. analysis, hindering the expressive subtleties of the voice. However, the committee valued the virtuosic solo part to be especially idiomatically written for Koppelstetter's voice and voice character, utilizing her exceptionally low tones and the highest tones in the upper register. Overall, the clearness and communicativeness of the graphical score and Koppelstetter's superb execution of it was appraised, thus confirming the appropriateness of the utilization of voice map analysis within the context of graphical notation. Other critical remarks concerned the somewhat low variation of the dynamic speeds of events, musical as well as narrative, and the treatment of the audience in terms of intelligibility and consideration of the different performance environments, with their atmospheric effects and some sporadic disturbances during the open air parts of the performance. The third demonstration of artistic proficiency was the sound installation opera Voices, Voices, produced by the Feel Helsinki Festival and the UniArts Helsinki. With this opera, Hyytiäinen aimed to assess the differences and similarities of four voices: Kaisa Dahlbeck, Annika Fuhrman, Marika Höltä, and Kaisa Ranta. Once again, the opera addresses the rationale of Hyytiäinen's larger doctoral project objectives in exploring the human identity performed and negotiated through sound. It presents four coloratura sopranos preparing for the performance of the imaginary opera Die Vögel, birds, or bird. The singers were musing on voice, identity, parenthood, gender, and little sisters that have gone lost in a forest. These impressions are presented in a fairy tale characters, sisters who invent their own language, as Kaisa and Marika were singing today, four coloratura sopranos in performance, the growth of a voice into a different gender, feelings, volition. The music includes abundant quotations from vocal pieces by 17th century women composers. The artistic committee unanimously agreed that Voices, Voices accomplishes and brings together the ideas, themes, and techniques of Hyytiäinen's doctoral studies in a most gratifying way. It convincingly demonstrates the significance and effectiveness of the postulation Hyytiäinen set to his artistic applied doctoral project, composing specifically for the individual characteristics of a specific singer's voice, rather than grounding on the traditional German Fach system. Four different singer voices presented in this piece interesting and indeed different ways of using sounds and colors, such as whispering, muttering, belting. Each singer was able to execute beautiful singing naturally and technically safely. Generally speaking, voice map method clearly has the potential of offering great inspiration not only to the composer, but to the singer as well, opening new doors to use one's voice. It's easy to see that the real communication already begins when using voice map method, that is, when voice map analysis facilitates the mutual communication via the set of questions, thus bringing the composer very near to the singer. The communication between the composer and the singer continues in the fascinating score with its performance instructions, full of joy, playfulness, that may generate relaxation into the singers, such as expressions such as take your time, don't try to make it proper or pretty. Maybe not so common in a score, usually. Alike the music with its internal and embodied nature of the individually shaped vocal sounds and timbres, also the libretto prompted the listener to look at and listen to inside the body. Hyytiäinen had beautifully fabricated some extremely deep levels into his libretto, and libretto by Henrika Tavi, regarding gender, based on the interviews with transgender opera singers. Along with all joy and happiness, one could hear both in sound and text. This section, Voices of Gender, I think it was a 7th section, was one big surprise in the structure of the piece, and therefore very much welcomed. Most of the opera uses collage technique and is composed in layers. The multi-layered and multidisciplinary architecture of the piece is organized into a score in the format of spreadsheet documents, which is in its orthodoxy, may challenge the rehearsal process. In the feedback session, Hyytiäinen agreed that he will have to develop more a combination of this Excel-style graphical and traditional score to produce a general sense of score and scene overview in the rehearsals. So simply make it a bit easier for the singers. Listening to Miika Hyytiäinen's voices along with the score, it is easy to be convinced that he has found the characteristics, special features and strengths of the voices of the 4 singers by using the voice map method. The 4 vocal parts of the work plausibly feel like music of the singer's own. The committee fully holds the accomplished use of voice map method responsible for the skillful and precise way in which the singers embarked on the brilliant implementing of their extremely difficult parts. Therefore, Hyytiäinen has now developed the voice map method and his compositional rationale into artistically and personally original form that appropriates and corroborates his artistic inspirations of letting go the German Fach system with its generic voice types, and instead composing for an individual voice and personality, and concurrently being aware of the singer's format, technical safety, and vocal health.
Thank you. Is there something that you would like to comment on at this stage, or shall we move forward with the discussion and questions?
Thank you. Thank you for these kind words. I think we can proceed to the. We can proceed.
Yes, you may be seated finally. I think that we will give the floor first to Dr. Ariane Jesulat.
Hello, Mika again. I have a maybe simple question concerning the kind of communication which is fostered by VML. If I'm confronted in musical practice by scores where it is completely clear that the challenge to get something to sing which actually can't be sung is quite a normal practice, even in contemporary composition. So something you might find in John Cage when by incident some actions come together which can't be made together, then the creative challenge comes down that you have to find out with your knife in the jungle this really to master this task. And sometimes if I see in scores, really in good scores, that there is to be sung a thrill on the highest B, and then to go 1/3 higher with inhaling. And I think that this is not the communication which you described by VMM. And so there are some creative ideas which are destructive by creative intent, and it's a kind of fictitious destruction. No one wants to hurt singers, but how does it fit in? Are you sure that VMM is really free from a certain stylistic profile?
Yes, thank you for the question. I was thinking about certain scores of Dieter Schnabel, which also include tones that are physically impossible for a singer to perform, and also many other pieces, for example, by Xenakis, with notes that don't exist in a harpsichord. I think the most important question for me is that if a composer doesn't have the information, can they really be free? If they have the information, they have the freedom of deciding, so to say, for the voice or against the voice. They have the freedom of actually making decision of doing something which is impossible. And they know what they are doing. And I feel that this is definitely something that's in the very center of my study. I'm really looking forward to getting to the situation where I can work with young singers and composers, and I will not be the one composing, I will be the one researching and seeing what kind of interesting solutions and decisions they make. But for my own compositional work, I also made those remarks in my score. I also did, for example, for Voices, I did compose things that I knew that would be impossible, but I did it knowing that the singer will know that I know it is impossible. It's a little bit of a circular aspect, but I strongly feel that, I have heard quite many times the exact things that you mentioned, that the singer has a score and it has something which is not possible or which is very demanding or even dangerous for voice. And they just need to negotiate between, is this just coincidence? Is this just misunderstanding? Is it something that is intentionally like this? And I suppose that is how I see it.
Thank you.
Anything else, or shall we sort of open the floor for everybody? For the whole.
You can open for everybody, and if I have something, I can come in.
Yes,
so that
yes, certainly.
becomes more
Yes.
variety in the discussion.
Yes, definitely. So please do.
One aspect that was noted by the artistic panel in the installation work, Voices, was that it, as satisfying and pleasing as it was as an video installation, a very successful one. It didn't show images of the singers, which on video, even with their different characters or voices that you had taken advantage of and analyzed with the voice map method, of course. We felt that it could benefit for the audience to see those singers, so that the individual characters of the voices would come even clearer. We were following the score where it helped, which obviously helped, but that is not the case, obviously, for the audience. So now, when we all heard and saw this fantastic live performance that I want to congratulate on and thank for. I became convinced that it would be very nice to have partly live version of this work, perhaps combined installation and live singers. And you yourself write about this. You tell that only when you saw the singer, when you were doing a voice map analysis of certain techniques, only when you saw the singers struggle with a physically extreme type of technique, and even tried it yourself, you really only then you really understood the data you got from the analysis. So I should make this a question. Well, do you have plans to plans to maybe work on this?
I already have an answer, so that probably was a question. Originally it was planned to be a full video installation. The version that we saw, or you saw in 2021, and actually the version that was also premiered in Helsinki Opera Festival a couple of weeks ago. They have the subtitles as video installation, and only in the last part we see some actual video, which is a documentation of the singers who are commenting how this process was for them. I thought that since I asked them to sing such weird things, it would be fair to allow them to say something. So the original plan was to do a video installation, and in a certain point, it became clear that it would be financially and logistically impossible situation if I want to graduate before 2030. And believe me, it was nothing that I wanted to do, because I'm a composer of experimental music theater. I have composed pieces only for audio before, but this idea that I would compose 50 minutes of music without having all the things that I could do visually was horrifying, and it took me a while to get past it, and then in the end I was happy that I had to push myself further. And in a way I like this how should I say, the magic trick aspect of it, that the audience, I totally agree that the version that, or I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but at least for me, the live version we had today and the recorded version, they are very, very different, because you can actually see the differences. You can see who is singing. It's very it kind of like shows how the trick is done, but it's still interesting, I hope. So we have plans because the grant that I mentioned about in the piece wasn't big enough. We still need to do some lying, but I hope that that it will come soon. But I have to tell you that the plans are not that it will be very documentary. So there might be situations where we actually see the singer sing, or we actually see who is singing, but there might also be situations where we see something completely different. And this aspect of the audience seeing the struggle or the happiness of performing, that is, of course, important for me as a composer. I need to know it before. And sometimes, for example, in video operas or in documentations, like documentations of classical operas via video, this physical aspect of singing can be an important part. And I do like to use it as a tool, but at the same time, it is a little bit, no one wants to know how the sausage and politics are made. I feel that it is important because I'm on the other side to see how much struggle it is and how it has happened. But at the same time, I hope that you all felt that this performance that we heard today was very light and easy, and these notes just popped out of their mouths, which is not true. It required a lot of rehearsing, of course. So this illusion of lightness is also in the classical scene.
That would tie. May I? So that would tie very well with what I had to ask and come. The first thing I'd like to say, I appreciate a lot that in your talk you said that you and the singer, in this generic form of all human beings that sing, compose together. I don't want to comment it. I appreciate it because it is true. And that brings me to this, what you were saying. It seems as when you're composing, often enough, when you're trying to meet this liminal space, this particular cross-section between being ergonomic and trying to carry as much of your learned techniques into it, and as if by almost complete different forces they have to cross at one point. And in that concern of trying to make music new, fresh, and at the same time yet ergonomically viable, would you demonstrate it with the three operas and with your report? I would like to ask you, because you said that there's a lot of knowledge being derived from this analysis, knowledge of the body of the singer as an instrument, because unlike any other instrumentalist, they are both human and instrument in one. And so this particular knowledge of the body that you have used very well, how would you then envision to use it outside of the voice for instrumentalist, where the instrument is outside of their body? And so what can you come up with in just
I have to. I didn't quite understand the question. The question is the instrumentalist outside the body.
Well, the instrumentalist, the pianist, is, let's say, for instance, has its instrument, his or her instrument in front of, and at the same time the body.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, would you apply the not voice but the IMM to the body of the instrumentalist and to the piano?
Yeah, that's a That's a difficult question. Thank you for it. Well, like, there are already tools for it, and it's called Instrumentenkunde und Instrumentation, Instrumentenlehre.
Which, but you would, sorry to interrupt you, but there's not the one violin.
In a way, this is already being taught at the universities all around the world, but and to a certain extent, violin is a violin to a certain extent, but I would never say that soprano is a soprano. We already did this thing, and I think that convinces me. But instruments are much more standardized, and to the point that many experimental extended techniques and multiphonics and so on there are books that tell how to do it, and since there are books, there is more than one instrument that functions in the same way. So it doesn't sparkle joy. I don't feel that this is something I should start to do immediately. Okay. But at the same time, I do feel that there are definitely certain things that would require some testing like this. Spontaneously, I would say that, for example, playing certain wind instruments and moving would create a situation which can't be learned in the books. So one flutist, if we ask that person to play flute and move, would probably have different range in whatever we try to measure than someone else. So there probably would be certain really specific, especially interdisciplinary situations where this idea of factory-made clarinet or factory-made violin, or violins are not made in factory, but this kind of a standardized violins do not apply anymore. Maybe this is something for other people to research.
Yes, I'd like to add that, in fact, wind multiphonics are a case in point, because they are the books and the charts are never reliable, and it is a comparable problem when students of composition take those books and write those multiphonics, and then they actually will not be produced. Multiphonics are typically instrument, performance, and performer specific.
I agree that I have heard about this problem before, so I chose the wrong example.
So I still have a question about the situativeness of the ears, or about the listening control. There are bundles of music which try to evade the control of the ear, so that you are, as a performer, you are reminded to rather look to the organs of production, to the larynx, to everything which is not the ear, that is just you bring some movement, some organs, and then maybe there will have some sounds, and so composers look for these composers, as you mentioned, Dieter Schnebel, but also Peter Ablinger and Nico Globokar, and also younger ones like Helmut Oehring, and really young ones who are really interested in liberating the composition and performance from this ear control. And by using YMM, it's really hard to divide this from listening control, because you it's kind of help to get better listening control. And how could you think, would that fit in a composition where you are mostly interested in sounds produced by the human voice which are out of control?
Yes, that's. Thank you for that question. That's also interesting and tricky one. It is interesting because I have, although, for example, voices is it's very about ears. You don't see the bodies of singers almost at all. But at the same time, in quite many of my own pieces, I have these questions of how what we hear and what we see, or let's say what the audience hears and what the singer's or performer's body does are connected. So not in the sense that that we hear some abstract sound and listen to it in an abstract way, but kind of like in the context of movement. For example, in an example of voice box is that in the analysis situation, Mia Hyytiäinen did unintentionally these movements for different areas of her voice, and then these movements were used kind of as a choreography later on in the piece, and I think that's for me an example of situations where we have something that comes from the body and something we hear, and then these two are used as a material of creating something new. And although I have also studied a lot of these scores that are more about movement and less about ears, maybe I tend to go with that direction. But I suppose this is a tool, one of them, and a person who would like to work very specifically with one singer could maybe use the voice map method or maybe part of it as a tool to learn some other things of the voice, and then maybe even realize that, okay, these are the things that are happening in the voice. Okay, this is what it sounds like, but the sound is not important. Maybe sound is just a marker. Or that when you do that sound, your body does this. Let's use that sound, just skip the sound. So I suppose it is possible, but surely enough, voice map method, although it's not pushing to a certain aesthetic direction, it has certain assumptions. And when I proceed to research different singers and singers with different backgrounds and so on, I hope to be able to learn more about this aspect too. Thank you.
I suppose this is related. I would like to ask you about the applicability or usefulness of the voice map method for composers who don't go for experimental vocal music. Composers of, say, art songs or operas in less experimental tradition. Obviously, in your own work, which covers such a wide range of vocal idioms, you already touch upon these more traditional lyrical type of vocal idioms. But apart from that, have there already been tryouts with composers, such vocal composers that I'm referring to?
There have been 2 or 3 tryouts. It's a bit difficult to say if it would be 2 or 3, and there were some technical COVID-related reasons and other this kind of situations that didn't allow me to follow the process to the end. And also, I felt that I wanted to limit this research in a way that it's about my creation, my understanding of the voice map method, and then it wouldn't have made a lot of change to have here 1 or 2 cases, because when that part is when we actually code that kind of testing, I want it to be substantial. But I would imagine that a lot of the voice map method would be very beneficial to people who are doing art song, actually even to people who do pop music. Belting was actually quite, I feel, maybe I'm wrong, that Marika Hyytiäinen actually found new things about her belting area when she was doing the voice map method. So I assume that different vocal styles would certainly benefit from it. And when I was doing the list of good questions, I was really trying to choose my words carefully so that I wouldn't ask things or use words that would scare out people from certain artistic or aesthetic directions. I remember that one of the questions was that when I asked, or I said that, does the voice have some specific or interesting experimental things that they would like to do or showcase? And I gave an example that maybe a laughter could be one. Already there I felt, and I was commented that, isn't this a little bit dangerous that you mentioned laughter as an example, because laughter could kind of scare someone away. So I think I left the laughter out. But other than that, I feel that all my words have been chosen from really center of the center.
Are we? Yes, please.
Well, just I was thinking before this conversation about your methodology here and the way you described it in your thesis. Mm-hmm. So we know that describing a lengthy process, especially an artistic process, is not very easy. And I think you succeeded quite well in your thesis, and especially in your lectio, where you chose a bit another view for this description. I think that was a fine thing to do. And you also showed in your dias the spiral of your process, your figure 1. And then in the end, you have the appendix, was it appendix 2, I think, where you have kind of, so here you show the spiral was the iterative process. And in appendix 3, it is page 215, you have this kind of more linear approach, where you have all the singers in the left, and then the time and description or the voice, and then the role in the development process, and then what you discussed with the singer. Now, for me, it was a bit difficult to follow your phases of development and the versions of your software. So I wonder, now that you think it, could it be possible for you to add the phases into your table, Appendix 3? Which phase in which singer you tried this VMM? And also maybe the phases, the 3 phases, they are mentioned there in the text, in the table, but for me it's almost impossible to follow up what happened when.
Thank you for this remark. Yes, it was somehow I saw this development process really. I felt really strongly that it has this cyclical nature, and it's also when people, for example, from Germany, ask what does it even mean to artistic research. I feel that for me personally, at least in his case, it has been this cyclical structure that from art I learn. There's a question asked by art, the answer is found in research or literature, and then solution is the third part, and then we start again. So I do see it rather cyclically, but I also wanted to somehow list down the singers, and you're right, I probably could have used a little more time in kind of combining those 2 ways of thinking. And also that list was difficult for me personally because I wanted to describe the voices somehow. And unfortunately, the best and easiest shorthand for describing the voices was to talk about voice types, and in some situations, Fach. And somehow I feel that that's also this play between or play how I use the Fach in this report, that I use it as an academic tool, so to say. I use it to describe people when there are a lot of them. I need to put them to different silos or categories, because that is what the Fach system is for. That's the whole point of it. And I did it obviously also when I started my study and decided that I will mainly study coloratura sopranos. And of course, it's a paradox to study coloratura sopranos, a specific Fach, in a research that says that actually Fach isn't detailed enough when you are working in the context of creating new vocal music. But somehow I hope that I proved it from within, so to say. So at least in voices, there were 4 coloratura sopranos, and at the same time there were actually these 4 specific persons, and the composition was much more detailed than just the idea of coloratura soprano.
My point wasn't on the Fach thing at all.
Yep.
It was about the face thing.
Yeah.
And I think your spiral is a brilliant way of describing your process, because I've read quite many of so-called action research reports, which just they are a mess. And because it's so difficult to describe a process, which is it's going all the time in your mind. Are you sitting on the table or with the singer or wherever? So it's a mess. The process really isn't a nice picture like this, of course. So I think this is a very good thing to have. And then the other side, where the kind of more qualitative information in your table. The thing is that I cannot. It's difficult for me, at least, to kind of map these two different kinds of description or different descriptions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the faces, I cannot see the faces in the table, nor the versions of your method.
Yeah. That's a good comment.
So, are we about to close the discussion, or? Yes. Okay. So I will now ask for the final statements, first by Arjani Jesulat and then by Ulla Pohjanmaa.
Is there any official formula? I have to say no. But if not, I would say that I clearly affirm that this is that this thesis and the report and the disputation in sum is truthful, doctoral, full of doctoral proficiency, and that I agree to make Mika Hyytiäinen a doctor.
Thank you.
On the grounds of the statements heard, the materials examined, and the discussion heard today, we, as the Artistic Committee of Doctorand Hyytiäinen, propose that the demonstration of proficiency is accepted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Music.
After this, I recommend that those esteemed persons present or online who might have critical comments on my demonstration of proficiency ask the chair for the floor.
And please state your name when asking a question. And we might also have questions from the audience following the event online. The online audience are asked to write their questions in the chat, and these questions will be read by the moderator of the streaming, who will also ask the floor as questions appear in the chat. Yes, please.
Uljas Pulkki is asking about the software, because you stated it's open source and it's currently unavailable. I tried to download it 2 hours ago, and neither source code or the software links are blank.
That's very important information, and it shall be, the situation shall be different before tomorrow morning. Thank you for this really important comment.
Sirkka Lappinen, soprano, coloratura. First of all, thank you for the very inspiring and wonderful work that you have done so far. Looking forward to the continuation. I hadn't had time yet to just take a glance of your written thesis, but what I got the image that you are testing sopranos with their softest tone and the loudest tone. And since we all know that if we are, you said that it doesn't have to be beautiful or very sophisticated sound, so it's just the softest and the loudest, which I always interpret myself to be technically difficult if I'm aiming to a certain quality in the voice. So why these two? And another question, if I may, was there a reason you didn't, for example, test the most comfortable zone, as in Finnish lepävyysalue? Or did you? Thank you.
Thank you. Very good questions. I feel I need to correct one small misunderstanding that it's understandable that it happened because the words were said after each other, but in my score of voices, I said, I can't remember what I said, something like it doesn't need to be pretty or it doesn't need to be proper. And this is not something I say in the voice map method analysis. In voice range profile and in voice map analysis, there is there's this concept that, for example, if you're analyzing a voice in a clinical study, any sound will do. There are typically people who have very damaged, very limited voice, and in that case, if they can sing, if they can produce tones a little bit more, a little bit louder, that's already something, because they're going to be able to communicate, they're going to be able to talk. But when I'm analyzing classically trained singer's voice, then it's not that any sound will do. It's definitely only, I think I use the phrase sounds that they would be willing to perform publicly, that are allowed. So, for example, if there are situations where voice breaks or anything like that, of course, it's possible that it creates really interesting points to the graph, but I wouldn't ask a singer to reproduce that squeak, and also it would be taken away from the analysis, because it's not a performable. It's not part of the singer's performance repertoire, so to say. Of course, what is performance repertoire is highly different from one singer to another. For some singer, this screaming or squeaking or doing these weird noises is the main thing. And then there are people who only see the classical training and that aspect of their voice as performable, and those two decisions are completely valid. And then the question of as loud and as soft as possible, so and the lepävyysalue, the idea that we try to find the maximum, but the performance maximum, and the minimum, but the performance minimum. They come from the voice range profile, and that is the starting point. And I did find it interesting and somehow useful. I did notice that it tells rather efficiently things about voice that are practical for composer to know. And it's also something it's kind of like it gives the range, so to say, and at the same time, because the process goes on and on, you do the similar tones a couple of times, you kind of also get to learn a lot about things that happen between. But in the list of good questions, this is also something that is then discussed, and then can be the communication can continue after that. So I've decided that the extremes are there, but then I remind the composer that, of course, extremes are only the limitations, and you don't have to use all the limitations. The interesting stuff is, of course, there between. And also things that are most comfortable and things that are most typical for singer's voice, they are also discussed among the guidelines of the list of good questions. Did that answer the question?
I think we are done. The examination is closed.